Hi there. We're now going to continue building on this track. Now, moving forward from this video, I'm not going to be going through any specific techniques related to production. We've covered a lot of the theory that you need to understand thus far in order to get your drum sounding as good as possible, in order to compose your melodies, your harmonies, and put together a track. What I will be doing is showing you how I would personally progress this track from this stage moving forward and get it to a point where it's a completed 3, 4, or 5 minute track that you can happily play out in a club and make sure that it sounds really good. This means I'm going to be using a variety of different techniques, some which you probably already know, some which you might not, but if you follow along closely, you'll pick up everything that I'm doing and you'll be able to replicate it for your own productions. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. All right, so first I'm just going to take a listen to what we've done so far. All right, there's a lot of great elements in here, and there's a lot of things that I want to be able to adjust, that I want to maybe take some things away. I want to add a lot of elements to this and start building it up into a track. So like I said, I'm not going to be teaching anything specific, but I want you to just follow along and see how I resume building this track up. First of all, I'm just going to adjust the levels of the hi-hats a little bit just so I can get a better balance and clearly hear exactly what is going on with a good balance behind the drums. I feel like that's really important. So the hi-hats are a bit too loud. I'm just going to turn them down. So I've gone into the drum rack, into all of the instruments and effects, and I'm finding the hi-hat group, and then I'm just simply turning that down. Now, what I'm going to do to add a little bit of ambience to the track is I'm going to take an echo effect and I'm going to actually place it at the end of the hi-hat group. So I'm clicking on the hi-hat group. We've got all of the individual hi-hats. These are the individual samples, and then these are the actual effects for the group, and here is the echo. Now I'm also going to press Command G. This is actually going to create another group, and it's going to create what's known as an effects rack. This means that I can actually duplicate the chain and have one chain, so one version of the hi-hats going through with no echo, the other version of the hi-hats going through with echo. Now, some people prefer to use the dry wet control. That's perfectly fine. But then what I want to do is potentially add more effects to purely the echo chain, which wouldn't be possible without having two chains like this. So dry wet to 100% because we've got a dry here and a wet here. And I'll rename these to wet, echo, and dry. So we've got a dry wet effect going on. Now the echo is going to be quite quiet in the mix. So if I play it now, you can hear that's clearly quite prominent. So first of all, I don't want a dotted note. I just want a straight, maybe eighth note, and I want it quite quiet in the mix. And I also want to filter it a little bit. So that's what it's given us in the background. Without, with, I'm going to increase the speed a little. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of modulation to this. Maybe I'll add a phaser. Again, just to give it a little bit of interest, give some movement to our track. Nice. And I'll also add a fair amount of reverb to this, because it's something that's kind of sitting there in the background. I can kind of afford to add a lot of reverb without it sounding like it's too spacey. And then I will sidechain it in response to our kick drum. Just because if I don't, the reverb is kind of sitting there constantly, and it is actually adding quite a bit of space to the track. So I'm going to use one of my favorite plugins to do this. It's by Soundtoys. I'm going to add a tremolo effect. And this is going to allow me to duck the volume of whatever channel, whatever instrument I've placed the tremolo effect on in response to any rhythm I want. So I have a preset here, quarter duck. It just ducks every quarter note, every beat essentially, and it does it in this manner. So you can hear that now. Probably keep it more like this. Now I'm going to start layering a couple more loops over this, again to emphasize the drums, thicken them up a little bit. I've got my core elements that I want. I'm going to add a few more. So I'm going to go to my sample library. Let's check out my percussive loops. Sounds quite interesting. Let's listen to it in the context of the track. It's quite minimal, it's not adding too much. Oh, I dropped it onto a MIDI track. Definitely don't want to do that. I'm going to drag and drop it here. Duplicate it a few times. I like to join them and consolidate them, make them into one audio file. And then I'm going to look for a hi-hat loop. I also really like this one, but I want to adjust it and edit it a little bit because I'm not sure those heavy bass notes fit with the track. So the first thing I'm going to do before I start chopping it up, simply add an equalizer and see how much I can take off just using a high pass filter. I'm happy with that. Now I also want to soften it up a bit, so I'm going to take a transient master by Native Instruments, but you can use any transient designer you want, and just turn down the attack. Then I'm going to take a fast compressor and compress the attack down even more, so really fast attack time, high ratio. And finally, I'll take something like a saturator to thicken the sound, turn down the output in case it ends up being too loud. Great. And I feel like that's kind of made some of the sound sustain too long. So actually a quick way I can get rid of this essentially is to go into the audio editor, into the preserve mode, turn that just to forward, and then turn the envelope down. Fantastic. And then finally I'm going to quantize it. Make sure my quantize settings are correct. I want to quantize to current grid so that it quantizes to the grid lines that I can visually see. Fantastic. I'm going to start mixing all of these elements in. I'm going to drag all of these and put them into my drum group over here. So I've got the group with all of my drum elements in there, and the way I usually mix is I start turning things one element at a time up. And that way, if I feel like something is kind of not sitting well in the mix, I can identify it quickly, and then I can start to adjust it, take some elements away, or add some processing in order to make it blend better into the track. So I'm going to start with just having my bass line there, and I'm going to start by turning on the drums, but I'm going to go into the drum rack. I'm going to turn the kick and the hi-hat down, and we're just going to have a kick. Now I can listen and hear to whether maybe the kick needs some more adjusting. In fact, I feel like it could use something. I'm going to attempt to add an effect to the kick drum that I think is going to thicken it up a little bit, make the sound a little bit more pleasant. I like that. It has much more boominess now. Now make sure that it's nowhere near clipping. It's not. That's fine. Let me adjust the bass level. I feel like the bass could use some of this radiator as well. I like the mic option here. Makes it a little bit brighter. To add a hi-hat to the kick drum. add it to the kick group. Just to give it a little bit of brightness. A clap to the snare. And I'm going to have it coming in just before just like that. You know, I like the claps separate on its own. I also want a deeper hi-hat to be present. Can you hear there's some phasing going on there? I'm going to use the 1176 emulation. Reason for the phasing is because I've already used this hi-hat, and because of the processing applied on this one, because of the effects, the phase is adjusted slightly, and therefore we get phasing between the two. So let me try and find another one. So I'm going to click here, hot swap. Sounds good to me. I'm also going to add a randomizing MIDI effect. Sorry, not this one. From the audio effects, we want the LFO. And then we're going to get the LFO to randomly adjust and modulate the decay amount. I'm just going to map the decay, and we only want a small amount of depth in sync with our tempo. Every eighth. With a square wave, so it's immediate. So some hits are indeed longer than others. buffer the loops. Consolidate them into one. So I'm actually going to add a tremolo effect here as well, so that when the kick plays, we do not hear that initial transient that this loop contains. No, you know what? I actually kind of like it without. Not sure about that loop. Not sure about this one either. So these two I added earlier on in order to teach you something as examples for certain techniques that you can use, but I'm actually not sure they sound too good in the track. And this is something that you're going to have to learn to accept when you're producing as well. Sometimes certain elements you add which you think might sound good might end up not sounding as good as you thought initially. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn them off, deactivate them. I'm going to put them in a group at the top, and I'm going to name this group unused, just in case for whatever reason later on I want to go back and just listen to them once more and get an idea of, do I actually want to use these or not? Once I've done that, I don't really need to worry about them for now. I can continue building my track. So the mix between all of these elements, I'm happy with. I'm really happy with.